Hello there. I know these are really hard times, so let me preface this by telling you a rather related story regarding me and my relation with politics. Some of you might remember back in 2015 or to 2016 that I was rather than an ideological gray area. I was left leaning sometimes, but aside from making really weird music, I dedicated my time being somewhat of an edgy person online, making commentary videos like anybody else on YouTube on an old channel. I somewhat followed trends of cyberbullying that contemporaries like Leafy or Parsonical used to follow, but I consider myself a sort of liberal-ish centrist person. I remember following a certain Second Life troll YouTube channel back then, and you gotta understand that back in that day, my general opinions of things tend to follow the opinions of other people online. So I was really easily susceptible to this sort of thing. Then in November 2016, Trump won the US election for the first term, and this is aforementioned SL trolling YouTuber was celebrating it with some sort of video mocking the people who were sad about it happening. This is not much anything unfamiliar to me, but then I was certainly familiar with similar right wing channels like Sargon of Akkad or $1 Million Extreme by then. But this somehow sent me into a downward spiral of radicalizing myself into the alt right, and my ties with said as SL troll YouTuber and other right wing figures started to build up. The problems arose, however, with my relation with the said Second Life troll YouTuber. I was making similar trolling gaming content and other sorts of right wing content at some degree, similar to that very troll YouTuber and even $1 Million Extreme to some degree. But this got me in hot waters. You see, this troll YouTuber is a very vindictive, jealous piece of shit. He will use any minimum modicum of my success against me in a way that he will abuse me in a way that will eventually treat me as his personal slave to siphon my success into his. But eventually, after I associated with other troll people from Second Life who he hated, he went all paranoid. I had to explain to him to just stop being so paranoid, and then he blocked me everywhere. So I got ties with this troll YouTuber eventually. He and the right wing related to him will go all the way to try to ruin my life in every conceivable way, even working with another Fortnite troll YouTuber who possibly you might have heard of from people like Moist Critical, and coerce me into literally and figuratively eating shit on camera. Unbeknownst to the fact that I was being secretly recorded by them to later post on Kiwi forums. Later on, after they did all the effort of reporting to police multiple times, they got me arrested by the civil guard for online hate crimes. I was placed on eventually into probation, but around 2020 things changed drastically. I became incredibly disillusioned with the alt right and how it has treated me and others. And I felt like the far right was not the place for me, nor anyone like me who's apparently grown too smart for them. So when Biden won the 2020 election, I reflected on myself and my actions. And that was the moment I started looking at videos from people like H. Bomber Guy, even more, or Counterpoints or Abigail Thorne, and this sort, and decided to get out of the far right 5 years ago. I contacted Laugh After Hate and I began a long process of counseling that still goes on today for safety measures. But now, Lauren Manning, one of the counselors of Laugh After Hate, who was also in a similar path for deradicalization, admits that I've improved so much over the course of these 5 years. Escaping, especially the mindset of the far right, is hard, and deradicalizing yourself from such a hateful movement is not an easy task. But why do I say this story that I probably told several times before? Well, as it turns out, and you might have heard the news already on the topic of this video, Donald Trump won the 2024 election for a second term, which I understand is devastating, especially for many of the Americans out there who watch this. I already learned my lesson, and I doubt surely that I want to repeat the same downward spiral that brought me to the alt right before when Trump won in 2016, for sure. But it still saddens me that this is a new path forward for America that will bleed into the rest of the world on some way or another, worsening the current geopolitical situation even more. I believe there's so many things to blame in this election, and granted, Trump ran a terrible campaign, but so did the Democrats for some reason. And one of the reasons why Trump was at this clear advantage this year was how social media created so much polarization and extremism all these years, contributing to a similar effect to that of 2016, when I was myself radicalizing myself into the alt right. So I want to basically help now that it's the perfect time to do so as much as possible to help. And to do that, I will not just dissect the factors behind Donald Trump's second term victory this election, but I will also offer ideas on how to currently combat it, how to survive it, and more especially how to live with it through the lens of analyzing social media's impact on the election and democracy. So let's begin. In order to understand how big tech and social media influence the politics around this year's election and similar, we need to understand the historical context that influenced big tech itself. So let's dive into a bit of a history lesson here to put you into perspective. According to Matt Stoller's book Goliath, there's a long history of monopolies paving the way to a concentrated corporate power, leading to undermining democracy. As Stoller writes, ever since America's founding initially, there was a split of an anti monopolistic sentiment. America was divided between those who believe in government centralization, such as Alexander Hamilton, first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, and those who believe more in a decentralized democratic power, such as Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States. More and more until the early 20th century, there were anti-monopoly policies that were enacted, especially during the Progressive Era, the New Deal, and so on. All these sought to regulate or dismantle monopolistic corporations to protect small businesses and the worker class. Sounds fine and dandy until World War II happened. You see, World War II was especially a catastrophe to be avoided, especially for the economy of the competing nations. So, to avoid that, there was a significant shift in post World War II in the US economy towards promoting growth and efficiency, maybe because they needed to build weapons faster or something similar. So, this led to a favor large corporations over smaller businesses. This time period in America saw policies that encouraged corporate consolidation and financialization, moving away from more strict antitrust enforcements made in the New Deal era. And a lot of the economists and policymakers of the time promoted the idea that monopolies could drive economic stability for some reason, laying the groundwork for the monopolistic corporations we have today. Then the 1970s arrived, and with that, under the Nixon administration, arrived the Watergate scandal, which brought a wave of the newcomers to the Senate and the House of Representatives called the Watergate Babies, a new wave of reformist and Democrats who arrived in response to Nixon's controversies and the Vietnam War. At first, these younger Democrats were looking to disrupt the old guard and bring accountability to Washington. But as it later turned out, their approach to economic policy diverged significantly from traditional anti-monopoly thinking. Instead of focusing on breaking up concentrated corporate power, they sort of adopted a technocratic view of the economy, influenced by free market and neoliberal ideologies. And you know how well that usually pans out. They solidly believe that markets, if left unfettered, will self-regulate and produce efficiency and innovation. This turned out as well as expected. They started aligning more with corporate interests, and they inevitably empowered even more monopolistic corporations under the guise of promoting market freedom. Again, if you think you're going to stop a murderer from, I don't know, unaliving people by giving him a knife, what do you expect? So how does this all tie to big tech and social media then? Well, in 1980, during the Reagan era, one of the many legacies of these Watergate babies is Congress passing a law applying for copyright restrictions to software, again aligning more with certain corporate interests. By then, the home computing industry of sorts will see the rise of technological companies such as AT&T, IBM, and so on, and many of these tech corporations really like more to keep their system close to the pesky pirates who copy their software and make their own in some way or another. What we in the business call hackers. Reagan dropped the IBM antitrust suit that had pressured IBM to retain its open architecture model for computing, which will leave IBM without any solid competitor so far. creating, that's right, a monopoly of sorts. 1980 also saw a little chicken neck fella you might be familiar with rear his head for a bit, a guy called Bill Gates and his little company Microsoft, who signed a deal with IBM to manufacture an operating system for said personal computers called DOS, and IBM also signed a deal with Intel to manufacture chips from them. These even protected Intel from Japanese competition. You should also know that Gates was a big deal in terms of software development since the 70s, and was one of the people fighting off the sharing culture of the early personal computer hackers. And Gates in 1983 with his company Microsoft owned the industry standard for personal computing for a while. Everyone had to pay Microsoft in the end for every computer they bought. And as a more sort of relatable note, everyone and their mom back in the 90s especially hated Microsoft and Bill Gates. Even myself did. If you remember, like me, having something like Windows 95 or 98, you remember that your Windows PC was more prone to crashing into a blue screen of death every once in a while for any minimal reason, especially as a person with little to no knowledge of technology. Obviously, all these problems were sort of soothed with more advanced versions of Windows and other software, as well as a more advanced knowledge of computer science and digital literacy. I back then studied a system administration degree in college to testify for that. But this is living proof that Microsoft was as close as it was to being a monopoly if it wasn't for other tech corporations such as Apple or Google, free to do all this sort of stuff even close to illegally because they had little to no competition. And this is a kind of groundwork that will lay off the path towards the modern state of big tech, to a point where they get to puppeteer our own democracies by lobbying into Congress in order to hold such corporate power over our government. Companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, or Apple, alongside major banks, healthcare providers in America, and telecom giants, have already reached levels of influence and control that far exceed those of earlier historical monopolies. They don't only dominate their respective markets by being only a handful of owning nearly all their own respective markets, but also wield significant political power, often shaping public policy to their interests. In more recent news, even Donald Trump just assigned Elon Musk as one of his sidemen in the White House, at least for a time until Trump gets bored of Musk's antics. Like here in Spain, some of the people from the People's Party, like Aznar, hold revolting door positions in electrical companies, like Grupo Endesa and the sort. To say this is complicated to unravel is an understatement, but this provokes a level of economic equality, weakening of democratic institutions, and severe cultural and social impacts that make them an unchecked power in the so-called democracy. On a similar note, fads like crypto and AI that easily come from big tech itself are functionally just new means of continuing the macroeconomic trend in place since the Reagan years, funneling more and more of America's wealth into a tiny group of wealthy people at the top. And the same infinite growth myth of number go up that I like to see in the publicly traded companies they invest gives birth to these sorts of tech fads like crypto or AI.
Modern internet is broken. Modern tech ecosystem is broken. Think of the apps you use every single day. Facebook, Instagram, even Google search. Broken beyond belief. You might have seen Shrimp Jesus, the latest feature of Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg on a recent earnings call said he's going to have an entire separate feed just for AI slop. Do you want to see weird disfigured children and more Shrimp Jesuses? Well, you're going to, because that's what Mark Zuckerberg wants. And why is all of this happening? It's something I call the rot economy. The growth at all cost ecosystem that has dominated tech. Technology and the biggest players in technology no longer are controlled by engineers. They're controlled by management consultants, some of the most evil people alive. And if you have an MBA, I'm sorry, talk to a priest.
A lot of this crypto and AI snake oil salesmen even stem from the right-wing ideology that permeated the Reagan years, and a lot of right-wing conservative rhetoric endorses these sorts of con and intertwines with not just crypto and AI tech or mere enshittification of tech, but also with plenty of financial scams and snake oil salesmen in the tech industry or otherwise. I mean, it's what's easily expected from the same type of people who believe God exists, or at least want to make you believe God exists, and is going to drag all LGBT people to hell. Reagan, or heck, the rest of the Republicans or Watergate babies or sorts, weren't the only ones to believe in this sort of ideology. For you see, There's a lot of names in the big tech industry that are deep into the sort of libertarian right wing ethos. In Marietta Shakey's book, The Tech Coup How to Save Democracy from Silicon Valley, she argues that many of the values underlying Silicon Valley culture are rooted in this sort of libertarianism, which favors minimal government intervention, a focus on individual freedom, and an ideal of unfettered innovation, so to say, basically the basis of anarcho capitalism. Names like Sundar Pichai from Google, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta and Facebook, and Jeff Bezos from Amazon have championed a vision of the internet as an open, democratizing force that will challenge conventional authority structures. This all sounded good on paper until you realize this all translated into corporate missions that focus on disruption and rapid expansion with all total disregard for acknowledging potential societal harms. Even Bill Gates himself in 1991, when Microsoft's rivals in Silicon Valley made the FTC investigate the corporation's practices, called one of the FTC's commissioners a communist and told Business Week, "The worst that could come of this is that I could fall down on the steps of the FTC, hit my head, and kill myself." This anti-communist libertarian right-wing mindset infests every root of the big tech higher-ups. It's no strange then that closely tied to Silicon Valley's libertarian ideals is winner-takes-all mindset, where Shakey described it in her book as a culture that incentivizes aggressive growth, leading to companies to prioritize market share, user acquisition, and competitive dominance over fair competition or consumer well-being. As you might know recently, this for instance led to Facebook or Meta and similar corporations to aggressive acquisitions, like when they acquired Instagram and WhatsApp. By absorbing emerging competition, tech giants eliminate said competition, increasing their control over both the market and the user data that fuels their models. This has contributed, as Shakin argued, to a handful of companies dominating key areas of the digital economy. This all ties to the aforementioned monopolistic practices big tech like Microsoft were endorsed to do by the regulations in place since the Reagan years, but that's not all. This winner takes all culture has created even a paradox. While tech companies promote themselves as progressive forces for liberation and democracy, their monopolistic actions often undermine democratic principles, and more importantly, so when people like Zuckerberg did mask off moment and said recently he was done apologizing so much after every controversy, fully embracing this libertarian ideal. As living evidence of how big tech companies sort of have this facade of progressivism, take me for instance, when I was in the alt right, many YouTube channels of mine have been terminated for doing such horrendous stuff that will be morally and ideologically reprehensible, and rightfully so. But then why keep now all these anti-woke channels like Sargon of Akkad or Steven Crowder, or even channels like, I don't know, Neurotic or The Quartering Up? Money and popularity, of course. They didn't suspend my channels because of just hate speech or anything. They also did because my little subscriber base, or the little to no revenue I made for YouTube itself and all the similar platforms, will leave me defenseless and will pose them no backlash. If they were to ban someone like, I don't know, Steven Crowder off the platform, one that has millions of subscribers under his name, not only they will lose a gigantic chunk of revenue, Steven Crowder's massive fan base will form a backlash showing men that will be forced to pull back his immense channel. This is why, as I argued in one of our more classic videos about how YouTube promotes right-wing ideologies, so many anti-woke, transphobic, racist channels keep popping up on YouTube without punishment or consequences. Similarly to other platforms, not only they align with this sort of libertarian free speech absolutist ideal, but they also make platforms like YouTube or Twitter a gigantic amount of cash to their pockets. And yet, platforms like YouTube every so often promote LGBT pride events and such on the platform, despite the fact that most LGBT creators end up either demonetized or punished by the platform itself, more than these right wing channels. Not only that, as Shaki argues further, that not only they boost right wing ideals, but also amplify misinformation and polarization, all because of engagement metrics, which can threaten democratic stability. Even coming from your average anti-woke gamer grifter on YouTube complaining about a pride flag on a Spider-Man game or about pronouns. This extreme polarization can lead to gridlock and undermine democratic norms and create conditions for authoritarianism to thrive. This similarly has happened in places like Weimar Germany, where this kind of shift within a nation's political system where politicians tend to have more radical ideas and are less willing to work with opposing politicians has led to the rise of Hitler and culminated in the atrocities of the Holocaust. Right-wing ideologies, especially the more extreme ones, thrive on this kind of extreme polarization, and they love it. And then this time of extremism is now having a widespread free reign on mainstream social media, especially on the accounts like Twitter or Facebook. Twitter more especially because Elon Musk manually altered the algorithm there to solely promote the most of all sorts of right-wing propaganda prior to the election. And this sort of problem should be an incentive against big tech to be regulated as a necessary component of a healthy democratic digital ecosystem by developing regulations that protect competition, enforcing data privacy, and this is what we'll tackle later, and by promoting transparency to ensure that technological innovation aligns with public interest rather than solely corporate profit. But, as it pains me to say it, corporations, like I said, hold massive power in government institutions worldwide, especially in America, so the regulations here might need to see a bit more effort than usual before happening. Besides, the adults in the room have left, so it's all up to us to try to push these people into regulating this said market. I hate to say, as a person who honestly wants to abolish the state, as a fellow anarcho communist, but it seems to be one of the only choices we got. Previously, I name dropped some of the more usual social media influences in the right wing grifter sphere, such as supporting or neurotic, but the right wing has as well its own web and network of influencers. And you can probably pinpoint some people like Andrew Tate, Joe Rogan, the Paul brothers, Jake and Paul, Logan Paul, and so on and so forth. These influencers, as pointed out by Emily Hunt in her book, The Influencer Industry, The Quest for Authenticity on Social Media, are cultural shapers, often shaping cultural values, consumer trends, and social ideals. She raises concern about the ethical implications of the influencer industry, such as the pressure on influencers to maintain carefully crafted personas, which can contribute to, say, a plethora of mental health issues. But more importantly, influencers on social media can also be politically influential. You might remember that time where Casey Neistat back in 2016 endorsed Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton. I will be voting for Hillary Clinton.
Or more recently, when Jake Paul of the Paul brothers fame endorsed Donald Trump in 2024. And considering what Emily Hunt writes on this issue, there are some serious ethical concerns with this. I mean, why would you trust on the political opinion of someone who's been constantly bombarding you with sponsorships such as better help established titles or even raid shadow legends? This poses a problem regarding their younger audiences, because younger audiences in particular may be more susceptible to these advertisements and even political endorsements, and as they often look up to these influencers like these as role models for sources for inspiration. Hell, I can even pinpoint how much of an influence someone like Andrew Tate or Sneeko are to younger generations, political speaking. And this goes all in line with the higher ups of social media as well. In an excess of unfiltered reporting, Andrew Marant, in this report Antisocial How Online Extremists Broke America, has delved deep into the ways social media platforms amplify controversial content and how individuals become influential by producing sensationalist, polarizing material that often bends or breaks traditional moral and ethical standards. This again tends to feed back especially into the aforementioned big tech libertarian right-wing ethos. Marantz further discusses the immense influence of social media giants and the ethical dilemmas that arise when platforms prioritize engagement over truth. After all, a dislike or an angry face button on a social media site is still engagement, and this still drives the social media consumer base to generate, in the end, more data and revenue for social media giants. I remember, and you might remember as well, the kind of thing that drove me into my edge lady phase on YouTube prior to 2016. The wave of edgy commentary YouTubers like Parasonico, Leafy, H3, and so on, who rely on cyberbullying and the sort. And I think this has been a huge factor in people like me being radicalized into the far right, even inadvertently so, with all sorts of edgy humor, even pro-Trump at times. I remember when Casey Neistat was relentlessly mocked by said commentary YouTubers for his open endorsement of Hillary Clinton, and granted Hillary was no great candidate, but if more of the votes or electoral seats chose her, she will have put a sort of temporary break on Trump's inherent fascist dictatorship for a bit, if not just his downward spiral of Trumpism slowly creeping into our democracy worldwide. These sorts of things have a butterfly effect on people all around the globe, and influences like these, or even the second life troll earlier, didn't let us celebrate Trump's victory in some way or another. A lot of people like us will save themselves from a spiraling down into a rabbit hole of radicalization into the far right and avoid the problems I have faced in the past. I know this by experience that this can happen to anyone susceptible enough to this sort of thing. Similarly, when influencers have a free reign on the collective consciousness of the online public, they, like Andrew Tate, Joe Rogan, and so on, thrive on replacing traditional media. For starters, podcasts in 2024 were king during the election season. Donald Trump was offering interviews to Jake and Logan Paul, or Joe Rogan for that matter, and Kamala Harris was doing a similar tactic with her fair share of podcast appearances. This is juicy for most political candidates because the percentage of people listening to podcasts in a given month has more than tripled in a decade. In the social media realm, more than half of TikTok's users say they regularly get news on said platform, according to a study from the Pew Research Center. And as I mentioned earlier, Elon Musk's investment of 44 billion US dollars into Twitter and subsequent takeover, and believe me, for the sake of your sanity, I refuse to still call it Twitter X because it's a stupid name and everyone like me acknowledges so, has had a major impact with political content, especially more right-leaning posts blanketing new users' feeds. This is because Elon personally manipulated the algorithm to promote way more right-wing leaning posts than anything else, as stated in a recent study from the Queensland University of Technology. In the meantime, traditional media has been collapsing on itself, mainly because of the huge influence social media has on people's awareness of current events. The main three cable channels in the US were down 32% in viewership collectively compared with 2020 to around 21 million, with CNN, for instance, losing almost half of its audience. All the while, Donald Trump went to 20 podcasts so far this election season. As Marina Hyde from The Rest is Entertainment said, the whole manosphere is listening to podcasts. It's no strange then that a lot of manosphere podcasts rely on snappily edited TikTok clips and the sort, which is the main vehicle these podcasts spread on, not just from said podcast producers themselves, but also from a whole plethora of people independently pushing these into a diversity of short-form content platforms like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, or Instagram Reels. Traditional media has a steady decline in readers, while social media is more sharply increasing in consumers. This is a thing that was feared to destabilize the 2024 election prior, when social media disrupts traditional media and gatekeeping systems, leading to an environment where disinformation spreads unchecked. In a similar effort, even big tech social media companies have actively chosen to reduce the amount of journalism seen by their users, favoring just content over news. Meta, and by extent Facebook, for instance, has reduced the amount of political content that users will be exposed to on said Facebook platform, or even Instagram and the newly founded Threads, and they also remove specific news features like the News tab on Facebook. This is one of the platforms that favors content that keeps people hooked on said platform, over journalism that can drive users away from Facebook. Elon Musk's Twitter takeover, including removing the verification checkmarks for news organizations in favor of a pay-to-play service, the Twitter Blue service, or so to speak, or X Premium, which also boosts the visibility of users' posts. There has been as well a material impact from Musk using the platform as a personal pulpit, so to speak, blasting out anti-media skits to his 200 million followers, which are likely boosted by changes to the platform's algorithms that Musk incentivized. And Google similarly has introduced AI summaries as part of its features, like the electoral vote counter back in the 2024 election and the sort, that increasingly keep users on the platform rather than going to other websites. It's also worth noting that Google worked with Associated Press for the election counter, but nevertheless serves to weaken the relationship between its audience and said publication by putting itself in the middle. And if not just that, you just need to look at said AI summaries that usually range from recommending you to use glue on cheese pizza to outright political disinformation. I think this is an issue I explored further in our prior PlayStation Startup video that we did a long while back, where Google favors this sort of sponsored articles or outright SEO spam. And this said SEO spam is usually a tactic used even by right-wing publications and the sort. That video by itself was a warning about how the use of AI will impact our perception of reality, especially in politics, but it highlights a deeper issue with platforms like Google, Facebook, and even Twitter. After all, like I said, this kind of rot economy that Ed Seiton mentioned previously will sacrifice their users' well-being for increasing revenues and profit. It's not that traditional media isn't it different for the most part. In fact, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post in some regard. But in terms of stock market growth, these big tech platforms have outgrown, especially over traditional media. I don't mean to sympathize with traditional media. I know things like concern manufacturing exist in our modern world, but with their decline, social media platforms have a free reign on political discourse to a degree that more and more people are getting their political views from them. And at least traditional media serve once as a way to keep their readers from disinformation and the sort. I said previously how tech like AI, crypto, and even smaller innovations in technology have all served the same right-wing ideology that was prevalent during the deregulation era of the Reagan years. How this is often used by right-wing ideologues to push forward these sorts of snake oil scams and similar. But another effect on these sorts of technologies had is that they came across with the resurgence of the concept that technology much slight hypothesis, where a small innovation like AI can eventually disrupt the legacy brand, which in this case is truth and evidence-based journalism. This at the same time generates a filter bubble phenomenon, another one of these small tech innovations, which makes search engines and social media provide information based on user preferences and contributes subsequently to an echo chamber effect. This can lead to a skewed understanding of public opinion as people are exposed primarily to views that align with their own. This is why, unless you are people like me who started radicalizing themselves from the far right with H. Bomber Guy or Philosophy Tube videos, a lot of online political content seeks to further validate their audience's pre-existing beliefs and thoughts, rather than educating the masses into new perspectives, like H. Bomber Guy or Abigail Thorne tend to look for with their video essays. It's a bit silly to think, but social media even further contributes to this sort of close-minded mentality that impedes these people from being educated by H. Bomber Guy videos and the sort. I love you, Harris and Abigail, by the way, but maybe you both have to try harder to seduce the opposition if you want to convince some things like anti-vaccine rhetoric being bad or anti-fascism being good. Not to downplay your efforts, which are immense, but a lot of the work involves on trying to open their minds to that sort of didactics, if you know what I mean. And let's face it, even myself and by extension, a lot of you are trapped into an echo chamber of sorts. I know we all do, but this is further exacerbated by the need from big tech to push higher engagements to pull more and more revenue. And I don't want to scare you, but if even household devices like refrigerators and toasters have been compromised by these sorts of systems, potentially impacting the democratic process, maybe that's a sign that of a warning about the sort of cyberpunk dystopia that big tech corporations have been taking notes from, despite not being manuals on how to properly build a society originally. In a 2009 TED Talk, Evgeny Morozov has argued that the internet can strengthen authoritarian regimes rather than promote democracy, and considering the current big tech environment, often challenging optimistic views on technology's role in political change, like the sort of thing that happened back in the Arab Spring or in Occupy Wall Street. He has argued, for instance, that technology does not guarantee democracy. Some regimes become more aggressive despite connectivity. You only have to look at cases like Turkey, where the repressed use of platforms like Discord, or even Russia, who outright banned the use of Discord altogether, like Turkey did. Even then, authoritarian states utilize the internet for propaganda. This has been coined the term spinternet, where social media platforms even are used to boost up an authoritarian regime's propaganda. He has also argued that censorship is often ineffective, though, as governments adapt to engaging critics online. You don't need me to explain how Russian trolls and a sword are a big player in this sort of thing, since these sorts of psyops are designed not for censorship in mind, but to change the public perception of foreign politics even. Similarly, authoritarian deliberation can strengthen regimes by creating an illusion of participation, as evidenced in countries like Russia even. The involvement in decision-making allows regimes to share blame for failures as well. Oftentimes, a lot of social media discourse even is focuses, especially as Morozov argued, is focused on cyber hedonism, which distracts youth from a political engagement, focusing instead on entertainment. I know this for a fact because a lot of our so-called breadtube streamers like Bosch, Hassan Piker, or Destiny, and the sort focus so much on the entertainment of platforming and fascists on a stream debate and the sort, rather than encouraging at least minimally their viewers on participating in actual political engagement. Yes, I know I'm somewhat to blame for this to a very minimal degree, but that was moreover part of my learning process as a leftist. Even though this also applies for right-wing grifters as well, this is a growing problem on left-wing influencers as well. Morozov, in conclusion, has emphasized the need to empower dissidents and civil society rather than merely increasing connectivity. Genuine political change requires support for those challenging authoritarian narratives rather than assuming technology will suffice, because with technology alone, it only has proven to sustain the authoritarian status quo even further. Because let's face it, it's not strange that these tech corporations of sorts have deep right-wing libertarian ties with when tech leaders like Chuck Robbins, Eric Smith, Jeff Bezos, and Larry Page have expressed excitement about collaborating with Donald Trump, a person we all know is an authoritarian dictator. No, I'm not wrong in saying it, he's actually an authoritarian right-wing dictator. And this has been proven many, many times. But I think that exacerbates the social media right-wing ethos even further is that role companies like Cambridge Analytica had in events like the US and UK elections and Brexit and so on, where they use huge masses of data for political messaging, raising concerns about the transparency and fairness of elections. I know I'm not the only one explaining the whole Cambridge Analytica story, but this is more important because of how authoritarian regimes and parties have been using this very same data to touch exactly the nerves of their potential voters and followers. This has been extensively reported by whistleblower Christopher Wiley at The Guardian, a 28-year-old Canadian who played a significant role in Cambridge Analytica. Facebook was used to harvest the profiles of millions of people, creating psychological profiles for targeted political ads, which Wiley claims he helped orchestrate. And despite denials from Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, Wiley has evidence that the data of over 50 million Facebook users were harvested in 2014, which he has shared with authorities. Zuckerberg, ironically enough, has testified this in court in 2018, saying, and I quote, "Last month we learned from The Guardian, the New York Times, and Channel 4 that Cambridge Analytica may not have deleted the data as they had certified. We merely banned them from using any of our services. Cambridge Analytica claims they have already deleted the data and has agreed to a forensic audit by a firm we hired to investigate this. We're also working with the UK Information Commissioner's Office, which has jurisdiction over Cambridge Analytica, as it completes its investigation into what happened." This obviously helped Trump in the 2016 US election, and this will have a similar impact of sorts in the more current 2024 elections, despite the fact that the blame goes more this time for Twitter than Facebook, because Elon Musk had a direct impact in Twitter's algorithm promoting far more the right-wing ideologues at the Republican Party and the Trump's GOP than anything else. Ever since Elon Musk took over Twitter, there has been an overload of far-right content on there, even rivaling that of Truth Social or Gab, and it keeps growing today to inhospitable and hostile levels. A blogger by the name of Tyler Cohen has written about a theory related to this, and according to his theory, the bombs on Twitter where Trump and his team are more adept have influenced democratic views to a significant extent even. However, the text also questions this assumption, suggesting that Twitter's sentiment may not be reflective or determinative of voter sentiment. It is also noted that in recent American elections, like in 2020 or 2024, Twitter's sentiment hasn't always aligned with electoral choices. But despite all of this, Elon Musk won, not by financial means because he dropped 44 billion US dollars to waste on terms of improving the usability of the platform, but instead he invested that money into making Twitter a propaganda piece for Trump and his colleagues. And we all know that despite the low voter turnout in 2024, right-wing zealots are restless and constantly voting Republicans or Trump compared to liberals or left-leaning people. Not to mention TikTok, which I already mentioned about it, but you'll understand why you've been inundated with thousands of podcast clips of growing misogynistic and racist remarks from Manosphere Charts and other similar people, as well as in YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels, all snappily edited in a fashion that tickles the dopamine receptors of younger audiences with lower attention spans that rival that of goldfish, for which they chew up and consume indiscriminately. more and more of it, even since the TikTok algorithm heavily only relies on scrolling or clicking. Merely watching a TikTok video will drive the algorithm to think you'll want more of it. This is the main reason as well why we should not oversimplify the impact of platforms like TikTok. It's not just about fake news or misinformation, but also about outright right wing propaganda carefully crafted to infiltrate the minds of future generations. It's kind of sad to admit that while higher education has traditionally been a democratic and left wing stronghold, it's still not enough. Its credibility has fallen, and the Democrats' move against big tech may have been a strategic mistake, as evidenced prior by the enormous podcast presence Trump had compared to Kamala Harris. As I previously mentioned, there is a significant growing portion of people who consume not just podcasts, but also social media content. And this is a problem since there is a significant fraction of tech capital that is deeply right wing, which is not always reflected in the largely liberal tech workforce. Is not just that social media, big tech, is deeply rooted in libertarian right wing sentiments, but also that they keep retroactively feeding into the narrative because, aside of many other reasons, it feeds them engagement and thus revenue. As evidenced by Andrew Maron's book, America has adopted an American berserk mentality fostered by the internet, where extremism and outrage have become normalized, especially in the right wing extremism area. This has a long term effect on the American democracy and public discourse as well. It's no surprise to think that influencers on YouTube, TikTok, and so on had a huge influence in this sort of American berserk mentality. After all, and I don't mean to intentionally include myself here, but in general, TikTokers, YouTubers, and all these sorts of people are small business owners in some regard, and small business owners like these love Trump. It's obvious to say that when Trump tells them that he's going to lower their taxes and limit the worker and consumer protections that hold them back, especially considering a lot of these small business owners on TikTok or YouTube tend to sell snake oil like courses or stuff like the Hostas University to people, which are basic gold rush era picks and shovels type of grifts mostly. A lot of cloud chasers on TikTok and YouTube benefit from Trump's aforementioned promise policies and deregulations, such as with people like Mark Longo, the pet owner of Peanut the squirrel, a squirrel authorities seize and euthanize for rabies. Mark Longo ever since has been campaigning non-stop and tirelessly against this as a cleverish way to tie in his OnlyFans, whose dick print is displayed prominently in most videos of the squirrel. More and more Trumpian conservatives and Republicans even followed suit in this campaign to avenge said squirrel. This 2024 election, as I said, had a really low voter turnout in the US, and contemporaries like me had argued as well that the right wing, regardless of final voter turnout or incumbents, is majoritarily relentless and tireless and constantly voting the same right wing conservative party. Cases like the one with Peanut exemplify how touching enough heartstrings on Republican voters has even intensified this relentless, often reflected in Republican votes. But even then, vibes online and offline are constantly shifting for occult and obscure reasons. Everything, even Peanut the Squirrel controversy, is temporary. For this sole reason, I suspect that experienced electoral volatility is both more familiar and less uncomfortable for people who spend too much time on social media. This sort of constant and rapid shifting of vibes, so to speak, leads to Skylar Scanlon theorizes in her blog to a vibe session of sorts, which is a period of economic uncertainty driven not only by measurable indicators like GDP or unemployment rates, but also by widespread pessimistic sentiment or vibes, the sort of doomer mentality that permeates on our current generations. This self-fulfilling prophecy suggests that when people believe a downturn is imminent, they cut spending or make other conservative financial decisions, potentially causing the very recession they fear. This kind of doomer sentiment is well permeated in the quickly shifting mentality between we're so back and it's over that infests modern memory. A case in particular of how these vibes quickly shift is with, say, for instance, the shift between Sony's Conquer game, then to Astrobot, to the prices of the PS5 Pro. Bad things don't happen more and more often. We just notice bad things happening more and more often, all thanks to social media and the internet. And this is evident as social media constantly relies on this, on giving you dopamine more and more often. The apps give you dopamine spikes more and faster until you constantly crave for more and faster dopamine spikes. It is, like I mentioned in an old video of ours, a Skinner box of sorts, where a lot of social media is particularly designed, like gambling or casinos, to hook you and be addicted to it. This further contributes to the further polarization of all these social media audiences. It erodes and kills democracies to a degree that have raised demands to the extremes, often right wing, and this, my friends, is how democracies die. Okay, let's face it. Trump ran a really bad political campaign. So did Harris. But you must take into account that not only social media's perception of both these campaigns are heavily twisted and wrong, but also that billions of dollars have been poured into Trump's influence on social media already, even to a point where whether Trump ran a good campaign or not doesn't matter. The most fervent conservatives and fascists went on to angrily vote against Harris and Biden, alongside the voters and leftist liberals and so on, and most are tired, especially of Harris and other candidates. Like I mentioned earlier, the voter turnout in the US 2024 elections has been very low in comparison to that of 2020 because people are tired of this system, growing even more undecided voters. But if I were to blame one thing other than many that could be to blame on for these results, it's social media, which in general fostered right wing propaganda to an extent that boosted the conservative base even more. There's so much to blame on this election. There are so many factors aside from social media that played a key role in Trump winning a second term. But on social media, especially, was one of the factors that enabled this third term. And it's justifiably so infuriating and sad. I know you as well feel infuriated and sad like I am. But I'm going to end this video on probably on a high note, giving you some ideas on what to do. We have to especially work on a left-leaning base that is unified in fighting all this sort of fascism and a sort. And for that, we have to pull the head out of our asses, stop blaming each other in a sort of blame game, and try our most to do some proactive action in regards to this situation. That will take a whole lot of small victories as organizing locally in organizations, NGOs, labor unions, LGBT organizations, worker co-ops, worker guilds, and so on, as I've written in an article regarding Trump's victory at JMAA.tv. But in regards to social media, I can tell you one thing. Leave social media. Social media is designed to keep you hooked on feel good addictions to a degree that is harmful, especially for the groundwork of democracy. I will recommend Blue Sky if you still want a social media that has a way less draconian algorithm, that has a lot of healthy discourse, and actually feels like a rather huge safe space, which helps. And I don't know what's going to become of Blue Sky in the following 4 to 5 years, but for now, that's more of a healthy alternative to the current mainstream social media like Twitter and Facebook. The owner of Blue Sky is a lovely lady who lives in a forest posting pictures of rocks and moss, and it reflects on the current philosophy of Blue Sky that said they won't have your data trained on an AI, and that the only AI existing is to moderate the platform some from hateful content and that sort and deliver a custom tailored post to your Discover feed. It's great to be on Blue Sky compared to the cesspool that is. And there are other similar alternative platforms that you can try. I heard Mastodon is sort of a decent alternative, but don't try Threads. That's Meta, Facebook, and Instagram. They will try to sell your soul for profit. But if you want to leave social media for good, try to focus on building connections with your communities locally. Build a network of friends and comrades alike with which you can feel safe and you can protect. I know this takes an enormous effort of leaving your smartphone aside for long periods of time, but it's worth it. There are as well plenty of resources to de-radicalization from the far right if you're so inclined, let alone a life after hate, which has helped me get out of the clutches of the alt-right since years. And one of their members, Lauren Manning, even has admitted I made huge progress in 5 years so far, so it's well worth a try. I know quitting social media addiction is hard, especially when it's so deeply ingrained in our society at large. But a lot of the effort involves into making a whole lot of smaller victories locally compared to rare, really big victories. And these really big victories are nothing more than an amalgamation of lots and lots of smaller victories. Like, honestly, find a purpose in life, especially because I said it's important to have the tools like labor unions and organizations at a local scale. It is also important to have a map leading you to the right direction. I know I do. And the purpose in my life of keeping to help society somewhat by at least educating it in the right direction has driven me forward in these bad times. Pretty much like it will drive you forward in bad times like these. If that isn't enough, I recommend you reading a book titled The Man in Search of Purpose by Viktor Frankl, a psychologist who was trapped in a Nazi concentration camp in World War II, will go in depth telling you about this and more. And I know it pains me to say this, but a lot of this effort involves one thing and one thing only. You need to go outside and touch grass. Thank you.